What is Islam? Part 2: The origins of Islam. But where does the message of Muhammad, may the mercy and blessings of God be upon him, slot in with the previous messages revealed by God? A quick history of the prophets might clear now. The first human, Adam, followed Islam. Therein he directed worship to God alone and none else and abided by his commandments. But through the passage of your time and therefore the dispersal of humanity throughout the world, people strayed from this message and commenced directing worship to others rather than or alongside God. Some took to worshipping the pious who gave up the ghost amongst them, while others took to worshipping spirits and forces of nature. It had been then that God began to send messengers to humanity, steering them back to the worship of God alone, which accorded to their true nature, and warning them of the grave consequences of directing any sort of worship to others besides him. The first of those messengers was Noah, who was sent to evangelize this message of Islam to his people. After that they had began to direct worship to their pious forefathers alongside God. Noah called his people to go away the worship of their idols, and ordered them to return to the worship of God alone. A number of them followed the teachings of Noah, while the bulk disbelieved in him. Those that followed Noah were followers of Islam, or Muslims, while people who didn't, remained in their disbelief and were seized with a punishment for doing so. After Noah, God sent messengers to each nation who had strayed from the reality, to steer them back thereto. This truth was an equivalent throughout time, to reject all objects of worship and to direct all worship without exception to God and none else, the Creator and Lord of all, and to abide by his commandments. But as we mentioned before, because each nation differed with regard to their way of life, language, and culture, specific messengers were sent to specific nations for a selected period of time. God sent messengers to all or any nations, and to the dominion of Babylon he sent Abraham, one among the earliest and greatest prophets, who called his people to reject the worship of the idols to which they were devoted. He called them to Islam, but they rejected him and even tried to kill him. God put Abraham through many tests, and he proved faithful all of them. For his many sacrifices, God proclaimed that he would raise from amongst his progeny an excellent nation and choose prophets from amongst them. Whenever people from his progeny began to stray far away from the reality, which was to worship none but God alone and to obey his commandments, God sent them another messenger steering them back thereto. Consequently, we see that a lot of prophets were sent amongst the progeny of Abraham, like his two sons Isaac and Ishmael, alongside Jacob, Israel, Joseph, David, Solomon, Moses, and in fact, Jesus, to say a couple of. May the peace and blessings of God be upon all of them. Each prophet was sent to the youngsters of Israel, the Jews, once they went astray from truth religion of God, and it became obligatory upon them to follow the messenger which was sent to them and obey their commandments. All of the messengers came with an equivalent message, to reject worship of all other beings except God alone and to obey his commandments. Some disbelieved within the prophets, while others believed. People who believed were followers of Islam, or Muslims. From amongst the messengers was Muhammad, may the mercy and blessings of God be upon him, from the progeny of Ishmael, the son of Abraham, may the mercy and blessings of God be upon him, who was sent as a messenger in succession to Jesus. Muhammad preached an equivalent message of Islam because the previous prophets and messengers, to direct all worship to God alone and none else and to obey his commandments, during which the followers of the previous prophets went astray. So as we see, the Prophet Muhammad wasn't the founding father of a replacement religion, as many of us mistakenly think, but he was sent because the final prophet of Islam. By revealing his final message to Muhammad, which is endless and universal message for all of mankind, God finally fulfilled the covenant that he made with Abraham. Just as it had been incumbent upon those that were alive to follow the message of the last of the succession of prophets which was sent to them, it becomes incumbent upon all of humanity to follow the message of Muhammad. God promised that this message would remain unchanged and fit all times and places. Suffices it to mention that the way of Islam is that the same because the way of the Prophet Abraham, because both the Bible and therefore the Quran portray Abraham as a towering example of somebody who submitted himself completely to God and directed worship to him alone and none else, and with none intermediaries. Once this is often realized, it should be clear that Islam has the foremost continuous and universal message of any religion, because all prophets and messengers were Muslims, i.e. those that submitted to God's will, and that they preached Islam, i.e. submission to the desire of Almighty God by worshipping him alone and obeying his commandments. So we see that those that call themselves Muslims today don't follow a replacement religion, rather they follow the faith and message of all prophets and messengers which were sent to humanity by God's command, also referred to as Islam. The word Islam is an Arabic word which accurately means submission to God, and Muslims are those that willfully undergo and actively obey God, living in accordance together with His message.